Just beyond Ul'dah's Gate of Nald lies a set of 80 stone steps. Desert-worn, but enduring. The 80 Sins of Sasamo, named for an Ul'dah princess, are physical testament to a powerful moment of the city's history, both in the steps' name and the deeds that took place there. Whether a moment of just retribution or shameful cruelty is a matter potentially lost to history, and only the steps themselves remain to adjure the truth. First, a quick history lesson. 600 years ago, in 969 of the 6th Astral Era, the nation of Beladia, heir of the legacy of Mach, had fallen into civil war and fractured in two, birthing the nations of Sildi and Ul'dah, holding a begrudging peace for a time before succumbing to their own squabbles, resulting 400 years ago in a war that left only Ul'dah standing. Not long after, in the wake of post-war unrest and the truth of horrific actions taken by the ruling class of the Sultanate, the Sultanate of the eponymous Ul'dah was overthrown in a political coup by Baldurf Thorn, who took control of the nation-state, and so began the more than 100-year interregnum of the Thorn dynasty. Near 200 years later, in 1388 of the 6th Astral Era, after the Thorn dynasty had fallen and power returned to the rightful Sultanate, is where our story truly begins. Sasamo Samo, first in line to the throne of betrayed her nation and elder sister, Sasadi Sadi, plotting the usurpation of the throne from the rightful Sultana by means of forging alliances with the vestiges of the Thorn dynasty in order to depose her sister. Before the plan could be executed, however, one of the members of Sasamo's own plot betrayed her to the Sultana, resulting in the princess's immediate arrest and imprisonment in the Marsaja pit, the jail of the city still used to this day. At the much publicized trial, the Princess Sasamo was charged with and convicted of an astonishing 80 counts of wrongdoing, from high treason against the Sultanate and attempted regicide to blasphemy and libertinism. A list of such length, it stretched credulity. Normally, such brazen crimes were punishable by death, but matters were not so simple, as Ul'dah's law specifically forbade the execution of any member of the line, leaving the situation at an impasse. To see justice meted out, the Sultana, Sasadi Sadi, tasked her counselors to design a punishment that would serve to duly humiliate her sister and be severe enough to deter any future uprising. The resulting sentence was a genius concoction of punishment and pageantry. For each charge brought against her, Sasamo was ordered to climb and descend the 80 steps leading from Ul'dah to Scorpion Crossing, 80 times a day for 80 straight days, reciting aloud one of her 80 crimes with each step taken. A feat of excruciating toil and humiliation for most folk. But Sasamo was a Lalafell, no larger in size or weight than a Hyr child at 3 fulms tall, and with the brutal son of Thanalan bearing down upon her, the punishment was more than cruel. The humiliation would not be borne in silence, though, as Sasamo began her first ascent up the 80 steps. The citizenry of Ul'dah eagerly gathered to witness the shaming of one of its ruling class. Raucous and gleeful as the tiny frame of Sasamo made her way up the steps. In the first weeks of Sasamo's punishment, the crowd would gather every morning at dawn to jeer and spit, hurling profanities and refuse without end. The repeated abuse was a heavy burden on both mind and body of the princess, and soon it began to take Sasamo upwards of 80 bells to complete her daily circuit, leaving little time between the daily climbs for her to regain her strength before the following sunrise. Yet, to her credit, the disgraced daughter of the former sultan refused to flinch, refused to hang her head in shame. It was this stubborn resilience that saw a transformation in the hearts of the crowds. After witnessing the tiny maiden will herself up and down the flight of steps, day after brutal day, the ever-present jeers slowly began melting away into silent awe before eventually their voices rose to cheers. And while the encouragement of the populace was enough to brighten her spirit, it could not provide succor for Sasimo's weary flesh. And on the 80th day, at the 67th step of her 75th ascent, the princess could lift her legs no more and collapsed of exhaustion, never to rise again. Yet what would happen next would leave the city-state awed and shaken. The crowd of common people, who had accompanied the princess for nigh on 3 moons, rushed to her side and gently raised aloft her wasted frame. They then proceeded to carry her in somber silence for the 5 remaining circuits, so that Sasamo Ul'dah might be absolved of her crime before her long journey to Thal's realm. The Sultana, Ul'dah, was visibly shaken by the turn of events and her sister's demise. Purportedly wrought with guilt for approving the punishment that would ultimately condemn her only sibling to death. In response to the actions of the citizenry, Ul'dah immediately proclaimed Sasamo's sentence rightly served, and moved to rename the very stairway upon which her sister fell, the 80 steps of Sasamo, that people might ever remember her sister. Or so the royal court would have us believe. Often do we find that history is as malleable as hot wax, with historians serving as but the seals of the ruling class. Might there not be another side to this tragic tale? A side that might paint a different picture in a less charitable light. The recent discovery of a diary, allegedly penned by Sasamo in her final days, casts doubt on the court-spun narrative that Sasamo was behind the failed coup in the first place, suggesting that the true villains of the story may in fact be her advisors, who were working under orders of the Sultana herself, in an attempt by Sasadi to preemptively quell any potential threats to her rule, by constructing an elaborate plot that would see her sister implicated. This inconvenient truth is further supported by the fact that, despite supposedly authentic documented collusion with the princess, each of Sasamo's advisors silently escaped any manner of punishment, with most simply disappearing from Ul'dah altogether, a convenient outcome for the Sultana. Perhaps, trapped in a position where any negativity towards the now martyred princess might incite the Ul'dah citizenry, Ul'dah was forced to make a move that would be received favorably by the public, thus naming the steps in Sasamo's honor. Though Sasadi said she forgave her sister and held no ill will, her actions would suggest otherwise. Attempts by the populace to hold yearly remembrance for the fallen princess were consistently fended off, and pilgrims who journeyed to walk the steps were turned away by guards, citing congestion. And only 3 summers later, the Sultana quietly ordered the changing of the steps' name once again to the current 80 Sins of Sasamo. All mention of the common folk bearing the princess's body to its final destination were stricken from the record, rewritten with an official account stating that Sasamo collapsed on the final step of the final turn. A surgically precise barrage of palace-centric propaganda wore away at the people's memory, eroding the truth and leaving them susceptible to a version of events convenient only to the Sultana. And even now, the steps are known as the Sins of Sasamo, with almost none who know the story. Fact and fiction are in reality never so clearly delineated, and sifting through the sands of history leaves us with a patchwork of incomplete pictures of the truth. Despite this, and for all history has tried to break her memory, as it did her body, Sasamo and her story proves that even in the face of injustice and impossible trials, there is always purpose and meaning in marching forward and holding our heads high. This content was brought to you by the Eorzean Archives. If you enjoyed this video, help us please the 12 by leaving a like and subscribing for new content every Thursday, and comment down below with any topic you'd like to see our archons cover in the future. For even more content, discussion, and exclusives, please check out our Discord and consider supporting us on Patreon.